Hello to everybody joining us. Welcome. We're going to begin in just 2 minutes. We've got some elevator music playing for you in the meantime for your enjoyment. As you come in, if you would like to, if you could just use the chat function to say your job title and where you are in the world, that's just going to give our speakers a little bit of an insight into who they're talking to and give a sense of who's here in the room with us today. Welcome to everybody just filtering in now. I'm just saying that as we come in, if we're able to, if you just put your job title and where you are in the world, just to give our speakers a sense of who it is we're talking to. We've got a really packed agenda today, so we can wait 1 more minute maybe, but then we will have to hop right in. Oh, hello, we've got a couple of names through. Welcome from Denver. We've got Tucker is in Washington, which is, I'm actually going to embarrass myself by mixing up my US geography here, which is why I hesitated there. But hello to everybody from the US. Hello to everybody joining us from here in the UK. It's quite dark here in the UK now. It's one of the features of being from the UK is that it gets dark very, very early. Unusually early for somewhere out. Well, if you're just joining us, we're just saying if you put your job title and where you are in the world in the chat. But I think that we have probably run out of time to wait. So I think that the time to begin might have come. So I am going to share my screen now. I'm going to discontinue this lovely music. And here we are. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the alignment. Welcome if it is your first time. Welcome back if you have joined us for multiple alignments. For those of you who are here for the first time, this is the webinar for global products. We uncover how we can drive global product effectiveness around the world through localization and through other means. We've got an amazing episode for you here today. Obviously, the subject is high ROI product localization. How can you make localization as effective as possible in its bang for buck? Is that an outdated way of looking at it altogether? I think we're going to hear some opinions today, and we've got an amazing panel for you here. Just a little bit about us before I introduce our panelists. We are Global App Testing. If you're not familiar with what Global App Testing do, then the clue is in the name. We allow our clients to understand their product experiences around the world a little better. We do that with our distributed crowd of software testers and UX professionals in 190 different countries and territories so that we can deliver the globalization data and functional testing to our clients to help them drive global growth. The reason that we're doing this webinar series is basically because we are well known in some kinds of product teams, but the most exciting work that we do year on year is always about global growth and is working with these more global product teams. So we wanted to introduce ourselves, to say hello, that we're here, to tell you a little bit about what we do, but also to hear a little bit about yourselves and what you do and best practices in the space. So that brings us to the format of this webinar. Although there are going to be 5-6 people talking at you, we also want to hear from you. That means we'd love for you to ask loads of questions or make points and comments throughout. Obviously, at the halfway mark, we're going to turn over to a panel discussion, and I don't want to rely on my questions. I would much prefer that the people in the room were asking questions. The way to do that is through the Q&A function. Everybody should have a little button in front of them that says Q&A and 2 different speech bubbles. You'll be able to see if somebody's typing an answer to that, and we will try and get round to all of the questions in the Q&A. Depends how many we get through. We have got an amazing panel in front of us today. So the first person who's going to be speaking is my colleague. Adam Bell is a member of our sales team. He's going to be telling us all about selling localization internally from the perspective of a vendor. We have to do it all the time. Obviously, you'll have to do it as well. We're going to be followed by Julio Leal. Julio is the head of localization at Spendesk, and he's going to be asking how you can identify and communicate your ROI a little better. Following that, we've got Jessica Grimm. Jessica Grimm is the head of localization management at Lovoo, which is one of the world's biggest dating apps. Jessica will be talking a little bit about their findings in terms of what they have done to make localization as high ROI and endeavor as possible. Following that, our penultimate speaker is Tucker Johnson. Tucker needs no introduction. He is the founder of Nimdzi Insights, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about what Nimdzi has done, the research that Nimdzi has done to identify what high ROI localization looks like. And finally, last but not least, we have Sahai. Iti is a global product leader who has worked with a number of different software businesses, including Procore and Klaviyo. She has spent some time as the chapter manager for women in technology, and she is going to be giving us her view on how to think about ROI in product globalization in general. I have been speaking for a long time now, so I am going to hand over to my colleague, Adam, who can start us off by telling us a little bit about selling localization internally. Over to you, Adam.
Yeah, cheers, Adam, and good evening, everyone. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm Adam Zabel, and delighted to be speaking with you this evening. So I work as part of the enterprise sales team at Global App Testing, and let's be honest, no one came here to hear me pitch my product or talk about a subject to an audience that you know way more than I do about. So good news, I'm not going to. That is your area of expertise. What I'd like to share with you over the next few minutes are some learnings about what I've experienced speaking to thousands of people in my career who have been trying to capture the attention of their senior leaders, gain the trust and investment from the business, and ultimately demonstrate the value that they personally and their team bring to the organization. So hopefully I can share a different perspective that may help you build additional localization advocacy from both your peers and leadership teams. So the reality is that each department is competing for two key leadership resources: budget and attention. Now, from marketing, engineering, research, insight, everybody argues that their specific role and responsibilities are towards the top, if not at the summit, of what should be the business's priorities to address. Now, here's a question for the audience. How many of you on this call use words like syntax or idiom or translation when it comes to outlining some of the business critical reasons behind why localization needs to be prioritized for budget? Most people write business cases based on what they want for themselves. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. We've all done it. It rarely works and often fails. So I've spoken to over 100 localization leaders from Google, Disney, boutique agencies, and the consensus is that the value localization brings to each department is still a fairly misunderstood concept. Is there a clear definition? Is it translating an app word for word? Is it defining a go-to-market strategy for a new country? Is it ensuring that you're both, user-centric, creating a local experience for global users while also still delivering the core value proposition of a product? If you're attempting to articulate the value of localization without prioritizing how your team directly aligns to what the business cares about the most, you're not going to succeed. So that brings me on to building your value story. So what could be done to better articulate the value of localization internally and ultimately beat out that internal competition of other departments for both budget and executive attention? What we've seen most resonate for localization teams is that their desired initiatives are presented to senior leadership as outcomes rather than problems. No other part of the business will care about localization more than the localization team. If a business case is solely presented through this lens, you will consistently struggle to capture the imagination of senior stakeholders. So, where does localization sit within your business? Does it sit under product, QA, engineering, insight, research? Who do they report into? Put yourselves in the shoes of these leaders and focus on A, what do they care about? B, how are they measured? and see how is what you are doing and want to do directly aligned to those two key factors. Based on what we're seeing across the localization community, each successful initiative has two consistent traits: a value story focusing on company goals beyond solely the localization team, and a clear understanding of three essential factors: metrics, the economic buyer, and pain. I could go into more. I'm conscious that my time is almost up. Thank you for tolerating a sales guy for 5 minutes. And if you're interested, I have created a one-page business case template that my customers have used successfully. I'm happy to share. If you'd like a copy, feel free to message me on email, adam.zabel@globalapptesting.com, or via LinkedIn. So thank you for your time. I look forward to listening to and learning from my fellow speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Always happy to hear about, I'm curious to hear more about pain from a salesperson. In addition to what Adam said, if you do have questions for him, do pile into the Q&A function. I noticed we've not got any questions yet, but honestly, do get around to it. You can anonymize yourself, I think, if so, just pile in and ask. I'm going to turn around the question thing on everybody in the audience now and launch a poll. The poll, I think, Kate, if you're able to launch it, send it live. But the question that we're going to be asking in the poll is going to be all about ROI and whether you can successfully, confidently measure and communicate the full impact of your work. So if you feel as though you're able to communicate and measure that impact, then obviously strongly agree. And if you don't feel able to, strongly disagree. I'm just going to keep that poll open while the next speakers talk, and then we will close it at some point and we'll discuss it during the Q&A, but it's a really, really interesting subject. So one I was keen to kind of get the measure of. So I am going to hand over to Julio now. Julio is going to tell us all about how to identify and communicate your ROI better. Over to you, Julio.
Hey, thank you, Adam. Thank you to all the audience joining us today. And of course, thank you, Global App Testing, for having me today to join in this amazing panel. So to start with, and as a preliminary note, I want to say that obviously not all industries and verticals are the same. So obviously the impact and the ROI of localization might be more visible in one industry than others. So as with everything related to translation and localization, context is everything. So if you want to communicate more effectively, you need to understand your context. And basically, this means understanding how all the different teams you collaborate with measure their own success. In other words, they know they are what are their challenge, fluent definition of this. Your goals should be about aligning your conversations with those definitions.
Hi,
and
Julio,
trying to always speak the
Julio,
same language.
Sorry, I don't know if you caught that. We're just experiencing a couple of connectivity issues. So what I've done is I've just turned off your video, and I think you're coming through a bit clearer now.
Okay.
If you want to continue.
Perfect. Thank you. So once you know each team's definition of success, your goals should be about aligning your conversations with those definitions and try to always speak the same language. So if, for instance, the product priorities are around launching new features or adding new user personas, make sure your conversations with them show how you will help them get there. Or if, for instance, marketing is now working hard to increase organic traffic on their websites, show them the value that your team can bring with a proper SEO localization strategy. Ultimately, all you want to prove is full alignment with the metrics and their KPIs. We all have heard how difficult it is most of the time to prove the ROI of localization initiatives. And that's just because it is very hard to quantify the revenue that originated directly from localization. You can certainly translate your app into 5 languages to cover 5 new markets. But at the end of the day, you need marketing to bring users to your websites and a sales team to turn those users into customers. So how can we measure localization's contribution to that conversion from users to customers? Put simply, we can't. But we can prove is that localization created the environment for those users to be attracted to your product. In a nutshell, we don't generate revenue per se, we enable the revenue. We can still prove success at a more strategic level, especially these days with shrinking localization budgets. Machine translation, and now more recently, AI technologies are allowing localization teams to do more with less, becoming faster, covering more content than ever before. So all these technologies have become huge ROI boosters for localization teams. Now, what metrics should I use and how often should I check on those? We all know there's no one simple answer for that, as your metrics should adapt to your company's priorities, and there'll be times when you should focus on speed, when disrupting new markets, for instance, and there will be times when customer satisfaction will be fundamental in more mature markets, and therefore your efforts to maintain good and fully updated localization help centers will be key. What is fundamentally essential is that you collect data from day one and that you talk data. Be proactively seeking data, as this will tell you which way to go, and be again fully aligned with your users' needs. An example, if you launch your new app into a new market using the local language, but you see that the local adoption is going slower than usual, you will certainly need to figure out why. And the sooner you react, the better. Maybe it's related to language quality, but it can also be related to the language option not being easy to find on the app. To recap, we all know that there is no magic formula for the localization ROI, but it's our job as localization professionals to make sure that the metrics we report on and that we communicate are always aligned with the overall company's strategy. And needless to say, these metrics will need to be adapted and reformulated as your company and your team grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julio. That's super interesting. And I think it's particularly interesting to think about the relationship between measuring for communication purposes and advocacy purposes and measuring in order to increase our effectiveness. With that, I'm going to hand over to Jessica Grimm, who I think is going to be talking specifically about that and the way that they've become more effective at Lovoo. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Adam. Also, thanks to the other Adam and to Julio. I already heard quite a few valuable points. So let me just tag along here. So I work for Lovoo, but I'm actually part of a bigger team. The team is called Team Love, and it consists of 7 companies that run 7 apps in the social dating and matchmaking space. So social dating is what most of you might know as the swiping game, whereas matchmaking is more related to questionnaires, personality type quizzes, and the more personal matching or partner selection. The Team Love has been working for Love for over 20 years. So the oldest product is quite old and has started as a website, but continued to evolve ever since. There are over 600 employees, and we have over 7 offices in 4 countries. But related to ROI, I will only show you data from Lovoo. So we start with the Lovoo localization setup first. We run on a freelancer-based model, so that this means that we have 2 people for each language, 1 translator and 1 reviewer, and we work on a 2-week release cycle, because this coincides with the release dates of the app versions. We have 2 agencies in the background for legal translation, as this is very important to get the terminology right and especially to also have people that are knowledgeable in local law, for example, and can render those texts which are quite different from, for example, the marketing or app texts. We have one source language and 17 targets at the moment. Soon we will have 26. So the scope is still rather small if you think about the languages that might be reachable. We run on a highly automated setup that does not contain machine translation at the moment. And by highly automated, I mean that everything that involves a manual step is cut out. So there's no file transfer, there's no task management, there's no emailing back and forth. It runs on a very centralized platform where translators get notifications and can start right away, and also file transfers automated by cron jobs, for example, so that we can get the downloaded translation back into the app with no conscious human effort except a pull request review. We have a continuous localization setup, and we start quite early also with Figma design translation, so that we can make sure that we actually have the translations ready when we need them, by starting way earlier than the development actually starts, when we already have the designs. Soon we will also have 4 more apps, but that's just a side note. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you data from 2016. That was the only time I ever measured translation ROI, or tried to measure it. Before, we decided to go into that market, we prepared everything. So we prepared the app translation, we prepared the store translation, the marketing materials, everything was ready. But I decided to say, okay, let's actually see what the impact of the translation is and figure out an ROI measurement. So the first thing was that we only released the App Store localization. This included product imagery. So when you open the app screen or the app itself in the stores, Google Play or Apple, then you could see a completely localized text and the localized images as well, giving you the impression that it would be a localized product. The product itself at this point was not localized yet. But we already saw a daily active user increase of about 7% per week, which was nice, but of course not what you want to achieve with a language release. So after letting it run for 2 weeks, we decided to release the localized version only. No marketing, nothing else. And we could already see that there was a DAU increase of 18% per week with a distinct buyer share of 14%. Okay, but as you can see here, when the rocket starts to appear, it only ever kicked off when we entered marketing space into the picture. So it's important to note that localization alone does not really cut it. And you need to have marketing spends to accompany your product launch into that market, and to be able also to follow through with additional campaigns. And for example, as Julio said, you need the users actually to find your product. And this is not going to happen just by having a localized product sitting around somewhere, but you need to accompany that with marketing spends. So on the next slide, let's go quickly over advice and practices. Focus on automation and scalability. Make sure you select the content that is needed first, and consciously decide what you want to translate first. Not everything is needed at the same time. Try to advocate for dedication when entering a new market. Ideally, that also includes staff to be available for troubleshooting or for helping and overseeing the process. And grow your process slowly. So even if you have a well-established process, I always try out little adjustments with one market first and see if the proof of concept holds true. And then I grow it gradually with the next couple of markets, and until I'm finally rolled out everywhere. And on the last slide, I already brought some takeaways. So strategy first. Also use market data and language facts that you can find. There's lots of material that you might have in your own data already available. User adoption rates, locale per device language, stuff like that, that is already in your analytics department. There's also language data out there. For example, Ethnologue is a great resource. There's also agencies and consultancies and also freelancers. For example, You might ask your translators a couple of questions as well about market facts. Next piece of advice, make sure that your company is engaged, that everybody loves Loca. So find a way to approach them not only with problems or troubleshooting, but be available for question, share interesting tidbits of information or knowledge, maybe what recent festivals there were, what cultural significance a specific fruit has, for example. So just make sure you have a constant channel for communication open, because this way you also get knowledge multipliers who actually point the people with the questions about localization in your direction and can help to make other people in the company aware that there is a person dedicated to international growth. So that's it from my side. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Yeah, super interesting. And I wonder how many businesses have done that kind of self-conscious experiment with localization. I suspect not very many. So really, really interesting to see. Anyway, I'm going to hand straight over to Tucker now, who is going to be telling us all of Nimdzi's recommendations and what we know about localization and commercial effectiveness. Over to you, Tucker.
Thank you so much, Adam. Hello, everybody. And as Adam mentioned, I'm going to be talking about Nimdzi's recommendations. I don't know if I can get to all of Nimdzi's recommendations in 5 minutes, but I'm going to try to cram as much info as possible into here. We have published over at nimdzi.com some articles and research around localization effectiveness and return on localization investment. So I'd encourage you guys to go reach out over there and see what Nimdzi has to say. But today, I wanted to take a look at what some of the other experts in the industry have to say. So we're going to start with a gentleman that many of you guys may know by the name of Ben Sargent. Ben Sargent's been around the industry for a very long time. He's currently over at Group Q doing basically what we're doing here at Nimdzi, research and consulting over there. And I like to start with this example because I found this article written in Software Business called Calculating the ROI in Software Localization by Ben Sargent. And this article is about 20 years old. And I like to talk about this because it shows this is a conversation measuring the ROI of localization. It's a conversation we've been having for a very long time. And 20 years ago, we're very much at the same boat that we're in now, which is it's a very challenging metric to measure. So in the article, we look at different things to measure, things like market share, brand equity, competition, cost of support, customer satisfaction, and expectations. Some alternative enablement metrics, I would say, rather than ROI. Moving on to our next example, our next expert here. Many of you know Natalie Kelly. For those of you that have been following the alignment series, I believe she was a guest last time on the most recent episode. And if you don't know Natalie Kelly, go over to her blog, borntobeglobal.com. She is a wealth of knowledge in our industry. And what Natalie has to say is, quote, asking localization teams to figure out their ROI, that's a bit like asking the finance department to compute ROI, or the HR department, or the facilities teams, or any other function that is simply mission critical for doing business, if you're international, that is. Instead, it's better to focus on impact. So Ms. Kelly's recommendation here is ROI is kind of, if you're asking about ROI, return on investment of localization, we might be asking the wrong question. Perhaps it's better to focus on other metrics such as impact. Moving on, last but not least, in my example here, I have many more, but I selected these 3 for y'all today. Jeff Beatty is currently over at Disney, heading up localization over there. And I was actually just chatting with him yesterday, I believe. But he writes, ROI is an inaccurate and false metric for localization, feature development, and release engineering. The list goes on because it's based on often false assumptions and prophetic predictions about the market. Translation is a revenue enabler, not a revenue generator. I'm going to say that again. Translation is a revenue enabler, not a revenue generator. Because we try to fit it into the generator concept, we get stuck with the false ROI metric. The enablement concept can clear the way for us to focus on opportunity, outcomes, purpose, and process and less unmoving units. And I love how he just sums this up here, because we're talking about revenue enablement, not revenue generation. And when we're trying to chase that holy grail of return on localization investment, sometimes we're missing out on something that's going to be much more effective for our cause, which is enablement. So how do we track and report on enablement? And moving on here, in 3 words, we need to measure what matters. So many localization programs out there are reporting false KPIs, or as Jeff would say, false KPIs, vanity metrics, what I classify here as operational KPIs. Now, operational KPIs are important to the management of an effective localization program, but they don't paint the bigger picture that's going to be interesting to the leadership team. So here on screen, if you're watching this live rather than listening to the podcast, we have a Venn diagram. Let's go back here. We have a Venn diagram with operational KPIs and strategic KPIs. Operation KPIs are focused on localization. We're talking about time to delivery. We're talking about quality, time, quality, and cost, essentially, the metrics that we know and love in localization. Strategic KPIs are the ones that senior management is concerned about. And in between these, we have the leadership gap. This is the gap between what we're currently reporting and tracking and what would allow us to show localization as a true revenue enablement function. Moving on to the next slide, we just have some quick examples here. These are very marketing focused examples here, but some KPIs that we could start tracking today: average revenue per user, conversion rate, average order value, email opt-in, lifetime value, customer retention rate, customer acquisition cost, drop-off rate, monthly active users, daily active users, localized A/B test, and non-English customer experience. Once again, these are just some examples. So to summarize, we need to take a look at metrics that matter. We need to be measuring what matters. And those metrics are going to be focused on performance and growth, and shifting from reporting on quality, like your traditional LQA quality KPIs, to what is the value. Not to say that those aren't related concepts, but they are different. So rather than focusing on quality, we're focusing on what is the value that our localized products are bringing to our end customer. So where do we go from here? How do we take action moving forward? And they're happy to chat offline with anybody that wants to brainstorm on this. There's many different avenues available for all of us. But today, I just have 3 questions that you can ask yourself about your program, your localization program. The first, what data do we currently track that could be blended with market-specific data from the localization team? We have access to a lot of data in the localization team that other teams don't have access to. By itself, it might not be very valuable, especially from a senior strategic leadership perspective, but blended with data from the finance department, from the user experience and customer engagement department, from the support department, from the marketing department, blended with that data, it becomes much more powerful and tells a much better story. Question number 2, what mechanisms do we have in place to proactively capture feedback from local markets instead of just waiting for complaints to be escalated? I'll rephrase this. How are you engaging your local markets? How are you engaging your international users? As the localization team, we can take that responsibility of being ambassadors for our global consumers, our global customers. How are we capturing feedback from them proactively so that we can provide that to inform strategic decisions company-wide? And lastly, what can we learn from other global brands about how to define success criteria, key performance indicator, and ROI for localization activities? You're not alone. You're not the first person to have this challenge. You're not the first localization department to have, what I like to refer to as kind of an existential crisis. Like, what are we doing? What value are we adding? There are plenty of other teams that have come before you. I can refer you to, if you download the deck after this, go to the Alignment webinar website. They'll have the deck of all today's slides. There'll be a slide in there about the Nimdzi Lessons in Localization series. It's a great series where you can see how localization is done and managed at other organizations. That's just one resource available to you. Professional networking, of course, is another resource available to you. So I encourage you, everybody that you see in chat, all of your colleagues here today, reach out to them, network with them, add all of these panelists on LinkedIn. It's a good group of people, and you're going to want to be in their network. And with that, back to you, Adam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I particularly love the point about moving from quality to value, just because I think obviously we are in part a QA organization. It's about quality, and I think that does mirror the journey of how we think about the function of a lot of the kind of tests that we do. So a really, really interesting point. I'm going to pass straight over to Itty, who is last but not least. She is rounding up with how Itty thinks and plans product globalization ROI. Over to you, Itty.
Thank you, Adam. Gosh, you put me in a tough spot here. That's a tough lineup to follow. So many great insights have already been shared, and I feel extremely inspired and encouraged. And as I think about the thoughts that were shared in this virtual room today, as an industry, I believe we're finding ourselves pivoting from a more ROI-based framework to a more values-driven approach, which is excellent. It's great. Because ROI, in my opinion, is more focused on efficiency. However, we're pivoting and we're directing ourselves to a more effectiveness-driven approach. So from efficiency to effectiveness, and that's essentially what I'm going to speak to in terms of how we can continue to drive that value and impact for our user, for our customer. Because efficiency, when it comes to translation savings, it's a quantifiable measure. But the effectiveness, when it comes to the impact, that's the tough one. That's a tough question, the million-dollar question to answer. So for myself, having had my beginnings in localization, today I'm an international product manager who leads, in my career, I've led several product teams focused primarily on internationalization, platform infrastructure, and I speak from an R&D lens. So I'd like to offer a slightly different viewpoint as specifically we're talking about product localization today and build upon what's already been discussed. And I want to present 3 views around product operations, which have connections and dotted lines to localization teams. And that can overall as an industry, as localization leaders, nudge us towards a more value-focused, more effectiveness-driven approach. And the first one is flexibility while defining a process. So trust me, I love a good process. I dream of having a good process because that keeps that guardrails in place and us on track as a team, as collaborators in general. But in the face of rapid market changes, as observed by the world and the global economy in the last few years, companies have had to pivot on their international strategies and really go back to the drawing board multiple times. And I've been a part of those conversations, and trust me, it's not easy to define a multi-year international product strategy when the given market conditions are fickle and there is no historical data in our lifetimes, right, to back it up. So reflecting on that experience, I can say it presents an opportunity for us to build flexibility in our way of working while embracing a good process. So what that really means is whether it be, thinking of effectiveness when it comes to a faster time to market, a scalable, flexible technology infrastructure, and most importantly, thinking of how we can provide a best-in-class stakeholder experience, because we want people to engage with us. And the true value may not be apparent immediately, but trust me, it will reveal itself over time as we navigate this this ever-changing, ever-evolving global landscape. So flexibility while defining a process. Next one, bringing the user along on the journey. So, we had some great thoughts being exchanged in this room, which were more, tied to the QA post-release functions and, measuring the effectiveness, which is still coming at the end of the line. So historically, the localization narrative, as I've grown up hearing, is that it's positioned as an afterthought, right? So everything is built and released in English, and now we're going to, somebody thinks of it, go ahead and translate, give a translated version to our international user as well. Relatable. However, over the past few years, I've seen the local community make that paradigm shift towards including localization early on in the process. And in fact, a few years back, I was a part of an award-winning innovation that included a community-sourced free Figma plugin that allowed for designers to see the design in real time in over 104 languages, which was, a plugin free and available to anybody who uses Figma. And since then, as an industry, we've made a lot of innovation just around that whole concept as well, and in terms of our localization technology and how it caters to it. However, when we think of a product development lifecycle, ideation, design, development, release, sequencing that, at all of these stages, we are thinking of localization, which is great, but where does the user come in? We have language managers, localization managers, program managers, everybody sort of included along in the process, but where does the user? The user still gets to experience a localized product or a localized experience after the release. So perhaps the perspective here is to include the user early on in the journey. And why wait for the release of the product, to then share it with the user and get their feedback, which is, again, a reactive approach and creates tech debt. I'm yet to meet a person who's excited about the idea of tech debt, whether it even pertains to localization. Let's include the user along with us in the journey and be creative. Find ways that you can do that. I've effectively worked on programs that aim at including the user along with us in the journey. And additionally, there is a dialogue in the industry on productizing localization that I hear often. So, we can make that difference and be closer to the beating heart of the company's ecosystem when we have access to engineering resources and product managers to really drive that impact. And a clear opportunity for that is to include the user with us in that journey. However, it is really important that we continue to have that balance as we do it too. So bring the user along on the journey. Next is embracing technology. One of the main concerns when I speak to my localization peers, loc managers and teams, is the fear of being replaced by technology, whether it was a CAT tool back in the day to MT and more recently AI today. I believe technology has the ability to be a powerful ally in our quest to deliver value. So instead of shying away from it, perhaps we can proactively lean into it. And this approach has the opportunity to empower local teams and also enhance their capabilities. The example that I like to use here is, when the calculator was invented, it didn't put the accountant out of a job. It made the accountant more efficient at what they do. So embrace technology. So sum it all up, our path to achieving a more value-centric approach to globalization, localization, entails wholeheartedly adopting that technology, championing flexibility, and bringing the user along with us in the journey of localization. And by addressing these three critical aspects, I believe we have an opportunity to evolve along with the global business landscape. And I encourage you to carry these thoughts with you as you navigate your professional journeys, where the value-driven strategies focused more on the effectiveness are ultimately the key to our triumph. Thank you. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. What an amazing speech. I am aware that we're slightly over, so I'm just going to really speed through these notices and then we can get the slides out of everybody's face and get onto the discussion. First thing to note, so we have another one of the alignment webinars coming up. This is on the 29th of November. It is all about product inclusivity. That relates to localization in that it talks a little bit about localization as a tool for driving inclusivity. But Doug Kim here is an inclusive designer at Microsoft. He has helped build a toolbox that enables Microsoft's inclusive design strategy. So really, really interesting. Definitely come to that. We'll add the link in the chat. In addition, as our regular offer is on this webinar, is that we will offer you a free localization test. So we'll be able to audit your software in 3 locations and report bugs to you or issues with your software that are going to have a high ROI or not, or a high value if that's what we prefer to use. And then finally, as Tucker said, Nimdzi's lessons in localization reports are available on the Nimdzi website. You can head over there straight away after this, and there will be links put in the chat to that as well. So those are the notices. And finally, so we've got this little sort of toggle to light speed now, because the time has come to align. I've got, thank you very much, by the way, Emmy, for asking the question. We do have some questions from our entry form earlier, but if you do want to ask a question, please do pile in and we can get straight to it. I want to start by picking up on something that Tucker said. So a couple of people, I think, were a little bit down on ROI as a metric and said basically that ROI is outdated or ROI is wrong. Are any of our speakers in favor of using ROI as a vehicle for thinking about this? You know, does everybody think that ROI is outdated, or where do we stand on that?
I'll jump in here. I don't want to say that it's outdated. I would make the argument that it's incomplete, or perhaps doesn't paint the correct picture. It paints a picture, but it doesn't paint the correct picture. As we saw from the different experts that I quoted, localization is not a revenue generator. Your end customers do not buy a translation, they buy a product. And in order to buy that product, it needs to be translated. So it is a revenue enabler, not a revenue generator. And I believe you absolutely can. And I've helped people figure out how to track and report ROI because they were in a position where their department head or their senior management wanted to see that. And it was a useful metric for them. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a metric that was really anyone was really getting excited about, and it wasn't a metric that was adding value to the end user. And more, especially in the last 5 years, we've seen localization teams take a shift more towards focusing on the end user, because that is one thing that pretty much anyone in the company can agree upon is an important metric to track. So shifting from tracking return on investment to what is the impact. And by impact, I mean, what is the user behavior when faced with localization? How is the user perception and user experience shaped by the localization? Because it's clear that localization needs to happen, but how exactly across languages and across cultures does that shift the way that your users engage with the product?
Jessica, you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in on ROI as a metric?
Yeah, but I would just like to offer an additional perspective to what Taka just said when he mentioned the user centricity. Bring also your internal development team to the table. So measure maybe how painless it is for them to request a new translation, how effortless it is to get it into the product, and how many maybe manual steps are involved, or if it's a fairly easy process to update a text. Stuff like that can help you a lot in designing a setup that is still based on a smooth KPI, more or less, or smooth process outlook, but gives you the value to communicate what your function does, or where a localization unit comes in handy as well, in addition to that user-centric perspective, but that you can use it to sell it. Just make the value visible in a way.
Very good. I'm going to share the poll results now because I think they're related to this. And I just want to give everybody a chance to react to the poll results. So I'm just going to quickly read them out because I know that people watching after can't see this. But essentially, we've got the question was, how far do you agree with the statement? We're able to confidently measure and communicate the impact of our work. And we have just 10% of people agreeing, and we have 40% of people, the largest cohort, on somewhat disagree. The same cohort over neutral. So the peak of the bell curve is kind of neutral to somewhat disagree. Is that what you guys would have expected the answer to be? Does anybody want to kind of react to that? Is it in line with what we thought was going to happen then?
This is absolutely in alignment with surveys that we've run for the industry and see who's tracking return on localization investments. And the reality is most people aren't. Yeah.
And you've got your hand up again, Jessica.
I never know if it takes it down if I just start speaking or not. So now I actually tried to answer the poll and saw then that it was disabled for hosts as well. But I would have answered the same thing. It's not really easy to measure what impact you have, but I use it the other way around. Like if I don't get any complaints, I see that as a good sign. And if I don't get much noise at all, then I also you have to hunt down the praise as well, but it's better. You're doing a good job if no one says anything. So this is also a good indicator that I found over the years that proves that you're doing a good job.
Very good. I knew an internationalization professional who said that he only knew he was making an impact when he broke everything and people started complaining to him. Adam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and just specifically on what was just said by Jessica then, it's almost the case of, are you marking your own homework in the sense of, do you feel you're articulating value, or is it, and who is validating that? And your point there around, hey, if no one shouts at me, everything's good. It's almost that case of who's validating it, how is it perceived beyond the department, and if things are ticking along versus trying to expand resource or test elsewhere, how do you navigate that? That's one of the biggest challenges, I'd say, is that, how are you perceived and how are you validating that against the company? It's a real pain for localization teams. Interesting you said it like that, Jessica. I find it quite interesting.
I do want to, sorry to kind of speed through these. I do want to get to a couple of the questions that have been asked on the entry form. So one person asks, they are concerned or have been concerned in moments in their career that they have a low return on investment, that their return on investment isn't sufficiently high. What action do you recommend that they start to take if they're working in localization and they feel as though there's not a great return on their work?
Build relationships with someone in the finance department and or the analytics department. No, seriously, because you're going to need that data. If you do want to track and improve your ROI, you can't do it with the data that you have from your TMS. You need to blend that data. You have the cost information. You have part of the cost information, because market entry costs include more than just translation. There's all sorts of other costs that are associated with going into any given market, right? So make friends with someone on the analytics and data team, make some friends with someone on the finance team, because you're going to need access to that data. Once you have that data, you can begin making assumptions around, because there's going to be blank spots, there's going to be gray areas, and you have to confidently make those assumptions about which spend gets allocated where and which revenue gets allocated to what. But yeah, the first step is make friends with whoever it is in your organization that has the keys to the data.
Does anybody want to come in on that one before we move to the next question?
I just think it's about tying it back in. Again, it's about perception, who defines what. So to Zucker's point, you need to have that conversation beyond your own team and with various stakeholders, because everyone has their own perception of value. And ultimately, finance is an explicit value against budget ROI, but it could be how you're tying into corporate goals, and risk is so much beyond a simple measurement. It's about tying in, understanding context. So it's okay to ask. It's okay to pursue that conversation outside of your direct reports and management.
Over to you, Julio. You've had your hand raised.
Yep, sure. So totally aligned with just Tucker and Adam said. My only additional note would be that maybe at the earliest stages of any translation localization program, maybe the ROI is not the best metric you can track. Maybe you should be focusing on other metrics in which you can actually show more impact. And maybe when the program develops and gets more mature, that's when you can start looking at ROI in more detail, and that's when you can start proving your added value to the company. But maybe ROI as an initial metric is going to be very challenging.
And Jessica?
I think it's also important to see where that question comes from. If it's like spanning the whole departmental efforts, like I feel that I don't get enough value of what I do in general, or I feel that I don't get enough validation or value out of, let's say, the French processes or everything that is related to just one target language, and then dive into deep and see what you might be missing. There might be tiny cultural things that get lost. Sometimes it's also payment providers, especially the technical issues are not to be overlooked. There's a different range of payment providers that are not allowed in some countries, but are heavily favored in others that you might not even have thought about. Credit cards is not a super big thing in Germany, for example. So figure out if you know enough around the surrounding setup where you are struggling or where the question comes from.
Very good.
One last thing, if I can just add one more thing,
of course,
is have an answer to this question. What percentage of your company's revenue is from international markets versus the home market? And I'm consistently surprised at localization. Most localization directors can't answer that question, but it's a pretty simple one. You can, if you work for a publicly traded company, go look at their Form 10K that they file with the SEC, right? Go look at their investors documents. Figure out what percentage of the company's revenue is from international markets. And that's just like a quick and dirty, and you can point to that. Put that on the intro slide for every management update that you give to senior management and say, we enable 46% of this company's revenue is made possible. But once again, I'm using that enablement term, not return on investment.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure we do get to Emmy's question, because it was the only one asked in the live call. Does anybody have any experience with this tool Pendo for ROI analysis? If we don't, we might have to move on, but because it is quite a specific question. No, I'm afraid. Oh, Itzy, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, so I've used Pendo, especially because, aligned with product, it has different functionality, and it's probably one of the tools that also allow you in product translation for banners and notifications, etc., if you need it. So it's quite effective in the sense if, there's a notification or something, the product is down, or a global event that is impacted. But I'm curious if there are metrics tied to that you are, the question is around metrics tied to the localization that you do in Pendo, or just overall the analytics that are available in Pendo. Because for the former, if it is metrics tied to localization within Pendo, I'm not entirely sure. I used the product many years ago. It was still in its infancy. It may have evolved since then. However, if it is tied more to the product analytics that are available within, a tool like Pendo, then you can. And going back to, several thoughts that were shared here in terms of, international user, their engagement, the adoption overall, and if, you can track whether it was localization or not, because there is a point to be made that there is a lot of, by default, this is a bias in our technology. It's left to right. It's predominantly built for an English-speaking market. The variant of English could differ, but there is that tolerance towards English in, in many global markets as well. So if it is the value-driven analytics is reflecting towards localization or localized product, or is it just overall product adoption in international? So several questions to consider in that regard.
We had a couple of questions on the intake form that were about economizing and about how people on the panel might have driven value efficiencies if they're being pressured by the FD with the dreaded red pen. I wonder whether anybody has advice around that they could quickly give around what to do if the business turns around. They say, we're looking at accommodating, we want to cut budget. Is there low-hanging savings that you can find in localization management that will help there? Itzy, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I think budget is always an interesting one. In different organizations, it's allocated differently. In my experience, when it comes to specifically localization, I'd say more is more. Sometimes less is more, but you need to focus on where is the most value the user is getting. If the user is getting value in, let's say your SEO marketing initiatives, then pivot to that and focus on that. If it's essentially engaging with the product, if that's where you're noticing the drop rates and the user is really not able to navigate the product without it being the UI being localized, then focus on that perhaps. And otherwise, it could just be onboarding and just help center troubleshooting. So focus on that. So depending on where you are seeing those spikes and those challenges, if you're facing budget cuts, focus on the area that will drive the most impact to continue to show the value of localization. And then, in turn, you can then expand on it and ask for more.
Jessica, over to you.
I add on to what Edie just said and figure out what also is where the value is placed by your higher ups. So is it retention of users that are already in the product in Spendesk? Do you want to grow? Do you want to turn them over and make the conversion rate better from already existing users, stuff like that. So, and then it will already show or highlight some areas that you might want to focus on first and see if you can move the needle there. And then it makes it also easier to explain why you do what you do. And maybe the red pen will not do quite such a big loop.
Very good. Well, it is now, well, here in the UK, it is now 6 o'clock. It is that our hour has been used up. So I want to thank all of our attendees and all of our guests, importantly. There is somebody in the comments asking, can they have the business story template? If you shoot us an email at marketing@globalapptesting, we will make sure we get that to you. I think my colleague may be able to reply directly, but if you send that email, we'll ensure we get to you. So thank you everybody for attending, and please, there is at this time, so 5 p.m. in the UK, 6 p.m. in Europe, on the 29th of November is Product Inclusivity, the next alignment webinar. We're really excited about it, and hopefully we will see you there. Thank you everybody, and goodbye.